Hi everybody, welcome back once again to the Eastfield Gunroom YouTube channel. This video once again is proudly sponsored by the British Shooting Show. If you're watching this video, you have missed this year's show, so don't forget to get it in your diary for next year. If you haven't done so already and you do enjoy the videos, do please hit like, do hit subscribe because we do appreciate your support. Something completely different today. We are going to have a look at the oldest gun we've reviewed on the channel by about 100 years. If you watch the channel regularly, you know I'm a huge fan of guns from the sort of 70s and 80s. This far surpasses that. I think the oldest gun we've looked at today is like a 1975 or 78 Miracle. Go back 100 years for this. So what we've got here, we have got an 8-bore wild fowling machine. This was a gun that was made by Joseph Lang, a very, very well-respected London gun maker. And we can tell by the address on the barrel, obviously where the factory was, that it was made between 1875 and 1890. This gun is even older than National Treasure Mary Berry. So of course, if we go back to 1875-ish, all you could get was hammer guns. There was no hammerless. We were 10-15 years away from the hammerless revolution, if you like. So this gun is quite interesting because it's on the kind of the cusp of where the hammerless gun was starting to be introduced. Now obviously this is an 8-bore, it's a wild fowling tool. It was designed to be used out on the foreshores, maybe some of the bigger estuary rivers, from the punt or from the bank. Now what's interesting with this particular gun, if we start with the barrel for once, is it's a 33-inch. Now usually if you had a big bore gun, regardless of the period, if it was an 8-bore, you would have a much longer barrel, 36, 39, 40 inches, which kind of puts this in the lightweight category. So a bit lighter for someone to wander around, do a few more miles with when they're blasting the geese out the sky. So with this being a hammer gun, it works very differently to what we're used to, which is of course is modern day Miracles, Brown, etc. You put the cartridge in, you pull the trigger, it goes bang. So what you've got here is you've got a hammer on the side of the gun because of course it's a single barrel. You've got two positions. You've got half cock, which is like a safety, and then you've got a full cock when it's ready to fire. Now this particular gun doesn't have a top lever. This is called a rotary Jones underlever. It was obviously invented by someone called Jones, you would imagine. Maybe it was Smith and Jones, used to be on the telly, who knows. And the idea with that is, of course, in order to break the gun or to close it, you push the lever across and close it up. This can only be done with the hammer in the fully cocked position. If you've got it on the half cock, it catches the firing pin on the way up and you can't shut it. So to secure it, you push the lever all the way across, and then with the hammer back, you're ready to go. As this kind of gun is not my area of expertise, which I will openly admit, I am 95% certain that if you had one of these guns in 1870, whatever it was, the only way you could shoot it would be to home load it. So traditionally you would have a brass cartridge case which was reusable, and you would load your components into it because it would be a hell of a load because you're shooting big quarry, so to speak. And what you would do is you would shoot that, and then at the end of the day you take your 2 or 3 brass cases home and you would reload them again for your next hunting trip. As always, we'll look at all the features of the gun and we'll describe them to you. We'll start with the action. Now this is what's called a back action, simply because the action plate, the lock plate, protrudes out of the back of the hammer. Now what you've got on the opposite side is you've got a great big screw holding the thing together, because what you've got to remember is the recoil would have been considerable, so it was very important that the stock was absolutely bolted down really strongly, because it was going to get rattled to pieces if it wasn't. The action itself, we've got kind of a round body. We've got what is very traditional English scroll. If you pick up a gun, an English made gun, regardless of the maker, between this sort of period right up to 1950s or 60s, this kind of swirly crustacean like a shrimp scroll is very common. It's, you know, it looks traditionally English. Obviously the whole thing was filed by hand, all the engraving was done by hand. Looking at it, I would say it was a reasonable quality gun. Obviously there would be the option to have a no frills one with no engraving, because it was to be used as a tool to go out to hunt for food, whereas this one is quite ornate because you've got engraved screws, engraved hammers, quite a lot of engraving, a bit of engraving on the top of the breech and also on the back strap. So this would have been, you know, an upgraded version of what the very plain option was. So the rotary underlever itself, you've got like a Death Ninja Star at the bottom. I believe this gun, interestingly enough, I know the previous owner and he knew the owner before that. So I can vouch for the kind of the last sort of 65 years history of this gun, and I know that in which time it hasn't had any remedial work carried out. So potentially this is still in original condition with some lovely patina. And to find something like that with that kind of catalogue of history is very impressive. We've got the back plates, we've got the engraved hammers, which of course the blued. Again, if you have an English gun, traditionally the furniture would always be blued. You would have a blue trigger guard, you would have a blue top lever. In this case, you have blued hammers. I mentioned the trigger guard, which of course is blued. It's a full length tang, well, like a traditional English style stock. Now that's quite interesting because that points to the fact, of course, that this is a lightweight gun. It actually weighs £9 9 ounces. Traditionally, an 8-bore single would probably be more about £11. And I would imagine that with the heavier guns, they would have fuller pistol grip stocks to kind of counteract the weight, whereas this, if you like, slender design lends itself to the shorter barrel and the lightweight gun. Trigger itself is a bent piece of metal, as you would expect, but it's made in London by a top gun maker, so it's got to be good. We've got engraved screws. Again, the strap is engraved, and we've got the serial number of the gun, which again shows that it's all original. Top of the action, we've got this kind of squared off lump, which I can imagine is for strength. Obviously, this gun would have been machined or hand carved from a solid block of metal, and we go back to the fact that it was all about strength. It had to be durable, it had to be dependable. It was shooting some flipping big shells. A little bit of engraving on the top. Going back into a nicely engraved backstrap, we've got a little bit of sort of checkering on the hammer, just to give you that little bit of grip when your fingers are broken on the foreshore and you're trying to pull the hammer back. And then of course you've got the nipple for the hammer to engage with. What you can see, what's very apparent with this gun, is it has been well cared for. You can remember it's like 150 odd years old, and the stories it could tell, you know, I would imagine are infinite. At the same time, you know, it's been well cared for, probably serviced when it was required. All the screws are in good order, and it doesn't look like something, it doesn't present like something 150 years old. Right, onto the barrel. Now you will notice this is a Damascus rose twist barrel. What that basically means is this is before the period of Whitworth steel, and at this time shotgun barrels and rifle barrels were manufactured from basically twisted metal. What that gives you is it gives you incredible strength, and it also gives you this fantastic patination throughout the gun. And of course, of a gun of this period, it would not have a blued barrel, it would be brown, because if you blued over the top of that, you wouldn't see that fantastic colouring. So we're going to take the barrel off now and have a better look at it. And to do that, we have an intriguing forend design. What you've got here is you've got a bar. It's not, I don't think it's called a bar in wood. Correct me if you're an English gun aficionado like I'm not. Feel free to comment below. What you have to do is you have to loosen it, pull it across. Again, this is nicely engraved. The screws are engraved. There's a lot of attention to detail gone into this gun, which suggests to me it was far from your ordinary wildfowler back when it was made. So when the bar is all the way across, the forend will literally fall into your hand, and then you can release the barrel. Now, once I've got the forend off, you'll notice it's got some nice checker in there. This tip on the end would have almost certainly been some kind of horn, I would imagine. They used to use bakelite and ebonite, but I think in 1875 it would have been some kind of horn. At the back of the forend, again, very, very skinny little forend iron, nicely engraved, very nicely blued, and we've got the original serial number stamped in the forend to show again that this gun is essentially as original as you can get. So, interesting point now, this gun is only black powder proof. It has never been nitro proofed. So of course, if you go back to 1875, they used to use black powder in the cartridges, very, very corrosive. You had to clean it pretty much straight away. It was essentially gunpowder, you know, made famous by that old guy, Guy Fawkes. And although modern day shooters would want probably a nitro proofed big bore like this, there are many, many people, there's a huge, huge following for black powder shooting, particularly here in the UK. I would imagine it's the same worldwide because they love the enormous bang, the flash out the barrel. It's literally like a firework. But like I said, if you are to own a black powder shotgun as a sort of a curiosity, just be aware that there is incredibly volatile stuff, very corrosive, and you almost need to clean it between shots. It's that scary. So black powder proof, Damascus barrel. This could most likely be nitro proofed. It's got an awful lot of meat in the barrels, as you imagine. I don't actually know what it's choked because I don't have the facility to check a choke of an 8-bore. You'd have to do that with the micrometer. Speaking to the people who have owned this gun over the last 60 years, the stories they've told me, the height of the birds they've brought down with this would lead me to believe there's quite a bit of choke in the barrel, which of course is what you want when you're out shooting big birds, like off Sesame Street. The actual barrel itself, the construction, really, really heavy, really, really solid. We've got on the top of there, we've got the address, which is Joseph Lang and Sons, 22 Cockspur Street, Pall Mall, London. Like I said, from research, we know that that was the address of the factory up until 1890, which enables us to date this gun within 15 years, which is pretty cool, isn't it? Top of here, the lump. Now, I can only assume that they use the same tubes as they maybe use for some of their rifles, because traditionally that's where you would have kind of a rear sight. And then you've got this square block here, which again is all about strength. You look on the bottom of the barrel, you've got the serial number, you've got J out for Joseph Lang, and then of course it tells you that it's black powder proofed, 3¼ inches, 7 grams of black powder, and you can't believe that those stamps are 150 years old. So moving on to the wood, the first thing I noticed is if you had a very fine English gun, I'm not saying this is not a fine English gun, like the Holland or a Boss or a Purdy, you would have much finer checkering on the grip. Let's not forget this is a wildfowling tool. It's designed to be out in all weathers, blowing geese out the sky, that kind of stuff. So ultimately you need that extra grip, which is why we've got a much coarser pattern and less lines per inch. The wood itself, I was instantly attracted to it when I saw this gun. I like light wood with very black streaks. What you've got here is most likely English, possibly French walnut, because of course we're going back 150 years. Now at that time, we didn't really have much input from the Europeans, particularly the Turkish, like we do today in terms of the walnut. If you bought a gun by a London maker in the 1800s, the chances are it was a piece of wood that was cut down in England and it was stocked in England. Very nicely figured, straight through the grip, because again, we need strength in this gun, and it's finished off with a traditional, very pleasant looking English silvers pad. This was the kind of recoil pad you would have at the period, regardless of the type of gun that you had. There wasn't really much of another option other than to have a standard checkered end, long before the days of the Kickies recoil pad. To finish off, again, this exudes the fact that this was a quality piece. It wasn't just a bog standard gun when it was ordered. We've got a very small, interestingly, oval for somebody's initial, but you might get 2 in there. Now, the length of this stock is 14 3/8 inches, which you look at the fact that it's got like a 30mm pad on the back and say that's quite short. However, because of the recoil that these guns generated, you have to hold them in tight. You don't want something that's too long, because ultimately that is going to batter you like a fish. So we'll put it back together. You can feel how solid it is when you put it together. I mean, the fact that it's 150 years old and it still feels as tight as a drum is very impressive. Forend back on, bar across. You could do that when your fingers are broke in the freezing cold on a winter's day duck shooting. So how does this big bore bad boy balance? So if we put it on a hinge pin, it's really barrel heavy, but let's not forget you're going to put an enormous cartridge in there. I don't know what they weigh. Feel free to comment below, because my experience of wildfowling big bore guns, I've never been wildfowling, I've never been invited. Feel free to invite me in the comments below. So I would imagine with a great big bass cartridge full of black powder, Duck Destroyer 74, that's 1874, I would imagine the balance is considerably better, because of course, let's not forget that this has been hand built by one of the finest English gun makers of the period. So that has been the oldest gun that I'm probably ever going to review on this channel, because like I said, it's not really my interest. I like modern stuff of the last sort of 50 years, but I got my hands on it. I thought it was such an interesting piece because of the fact that it's kind of not the norm, if you like, for an 8-bore single barrel of 150 years ago. There's a sentence I never thought I'd have to say. If you've got any questions about this particular gun, please feel free to contact me directly. Emails on the screen. If you want to comment below and you want to give me some tips and hints about big bore shooting, or you're a historian, you're a Joseph Lang fan, you might be Mary Berry, feel free to do so. I'm always happy to learn. Don't forget to check out the website. If you have enjoyed this video, I know it's been very different to the norm, so thanks for tuning in. Do hit like, do hit subscribe. Once again, thank you to our sponsors, the British Shooting Show. Remember, we're now looking to next year. Dates will be released soon. And from me and this big bore bad boy, I'll see you next time.